OMG, drunk, taken by her rich boss and woken up in a bathtub. Unexpected ending. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Jennifer Carter stood before the floor-length mirror in the ladies' room of the Grand Madison Hotel, adjusting her navy blazer for the 5th time. The annual corporate gala buzzed with energy beyond the bathroom's marble walls, a symphony of clinking glasses and muffled laughter seeping through. She studied her reflection, professional, polished, yet somehow still feeling like an imposter among the titans of industry gathering in the ballroom. "You belong here," she whispered to herself, smoothing down her carefully styled brown hair. The words felt hollow, echoing off the pristine surfaces around her. 3 years as executive assistant to Charles Hayes, CEO of Hayes Enterprises, and she still couldn't shake the feeling that she was one misstep away from losing everything she'd worked for. The bathroom door swung open, and Rebecca Palmer from marketing swept in, her red cocktail dress a flash of color against the cream tiles. "There you are. Charles is looking for you. Something about the Wilson contract presentation." Jennifer's stomach tightened. The Wilson contract, the deal that could either cement Hayes Enterprises' position in the market or become their most public failure. She'd spent weeks preparing those files, quadruple-checking every detail. "Thanks, Rebecca." Jennifer gave her reflection one final glance and strode out into the corridor, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The sound echoed her heartbeat, steady, determined, masking the anxiety churning beneath. The ballroom was a scene from a modern fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the gathered crowd, board members, investors, industry rivals, all mingling in their finest attire. And there, at the center of it all, stood Charles Hayes. Even from across the room he commanded attention, tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored black suit, his dark hair showing just a touch of distinguished gray at the temples. He was speaking with Gerald Wilson himself, his expression unreadable as always. That was the thing about Charles. In 3 years, Jennifer had never seen him truly rattled. He wore his composure like armor, and sometimes she wondered if anything human existed beneath it. As if sensing her presence, Charles's eyes met hers across the room. A slight nod, barely perceptible, summoned her to his side. Jennifer navigated through the crowd, clutching her tablet like a shield. "Mr. Wilson was just asking about the projected numbers for Q3, Charles said as she approached, his voice carrying that familiar hint of steel beneath its smooth surface. "The ones from the revised proposal." Jennifer's fingers flew across her tablet, pulling up the relevant documents. This was where she excelled, anticipating needs, having answers before the questions were fully formed. The updated projections show a 23% increase in market penetration, with conservative estimates placing the ROI at... The next hour passed in a blur of presentations and carefully orchestrated small talk. Jennifer stayed close to Charles, providing data and context whenever needed, watching him work the room with the precision of a master conductor. By the time the formal presentations concluded, her shoulders ached from maintaining perfect posture, and her mind buzzed with a mixture of adrenaline and exhaustion. "You did well tonight," Charles said quietly as the crowd began to thin. Coming from him, it was high praise indeed. He stood beside her at the bar, loosening his tie ever so slightly. The only sign that even Charles Hayes was human enough to feel fatigue. "Thank you, sir," Jennifer signaled the bartender. "I think we can call the Wilson presentation a success." Indeed. He studied her for a moment, his dark eyes thoughtful. "You should celebrate. It's been a long month of preparation." Jennifer hesitated, then ordered a gin and tonic. She rarely drank at corporate events, but tonight felt different. The success of the Wilson contract, Charles's rare praise, the lingering uncertainty that had been haunting her lately, it all swirled together like the ice in her glass. Just one, she promised herself, not noticing how Charles's expression shifted slightly as he watched her take the first sip. If she had, she might have noticed something else too, the way his eyes scanned the remaining crowd, lingering on certain faces with carefully concealed suspicion. But Jennifer didn't notice. Instead, she felt the warmth of the drink spreading through her chest, loosening the knots of tension she'd been carrying for weeks. The lights seemed brighter, the music sweeter. One drink became two, became three, each one washing away more of her careful restraint. The last clear memory she would have of that night was Charles's voice, saying something that sounded important, but the words slipped away like water through her fingers, and the world began to spin in a way that had nothing to do with celebration. Everything after that would become a mystery, one that would change her life forever. Consciousness returned to Jennifer in waves of discomfort. First came the throbbing behind her eyes, then the sharp awareness of wet fabric clinging to her skin. The air around her was thick with steam and the scent of expensive sandalwood. Something hard pressed against her back, smooth, cool marble. Her eyes flew open, then immediately squeezed shut against the harsh light filtering through frosted glass windows. This wasn't her cramped apartment bathroom with its plastic shower curtain and temperamental water heater. This was, "You're awake." The voice, deep, familiar, impossible, sent her heart racing. Jennifer forced her eyes open again, fighting against the piercing light. Charles Hayes stood in the doorway of what she now realized was an enormous bathroom, his usual impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. His suit jacket was gone, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms she'd never seen before. "What?" Her voice came out as a croak. She tried to sit up, realizing she was lying in a massive marble bathtub, still fully dressed in her clothes from the gala. "What happened?" Charles didn't move from his position in the doorway. "What do you remember?" Jennifer pressed her palms against the cool marble, trying to ground herself. Fragments of the previous night flashed through her mind, the Wilson contract, celebrating at the bar, Charles saying something important. Then nothing, just a black void where her memories should be. "I don't..." Panic clawed at her throat. "Why am I in your house?" "My bathroom, specifically." His voice remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "You were in no condition to make it home safely last night." Jennifer looked down at herself, her once elegant black dress now wrinkled and damp, her feet bare. Where were her shoes, her purse, her phone? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed despite being fully clothed. "Did we..." She couldn't finish the question. "No." The word came sharp and quick. "Nothing happened, Jennifer. I found you outside the hotel, barely conscious. You needed help." She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Charles met her gaze steadily, but there was something there, something beneath his usual mask of control. Was it concern, guilt, or something else entirely? "You should change," he continued, gesturing to a stack of folded clothes on the marble counter. "My housekeeper left those for you. There's also water and aspirin." Jennifer's head pounded in sync with her heartbeat. "What time is it?" "Just past 9. His expression softened slightly. "It's Saturday. You don't need to worry about work." Work. God, what had she done? 3 years of maintaining utterly professional boundaries, of being the perfect executive assistant, all potentially ruined. In one night, she pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to massage away the pain, both physical and professional. "I should go," she said, attempting to stand. The world tilted dangerously, and she gripped the edge of the tub. Charles took a step forward, then stopped himself. "You're in no condition to drive, rest, recover. We can discuss what happened when you're feeling better." Something in his tone made her pause. "What do you mean, what happened? You said nothing happened." He was quiet for a moment too long. "Get changed, Jennifer. I'll have coffee waiting in the kitchen." Before she could protest, he was gone, pulling the heavy bathroom door closed behind him. Jennifer sat there in the cooling water, staring at the space where he had been, trying to piece together the fragments of her memory. The bar. She remembered the bar. The gin and tonics that had seemed like such a good idea at the time. But after that third drink, there was something. A conversation. A face in the crowd. The harder she tried to remember, the more the memories slipped away. With shaking hands, she reached for the stack of clothes, simple black yoga pants and a soft grey sweater, practical, expensive, impersonal, like everything else about Charles Hayes. But as she changed, letting her ruined dress fall to the marble floor, another memory surfaced, the sensation of strong arms around her, a voice murmuring, "You're safe now," in her ear. In the mirror above the sink, her reflection told a story she couldn't quite read. Her makeup was smeared, hair tangled, but it was her eyes that caught her attention. They held a wild, haunted look, like someone who had glimpsed something they weren't supposed to see. She splashed cold water on her face, trying to wash away the fog of her hangover and the unsettling feeling that she was missing something crucial. Charles was waiting with answers, but something told her she might not want to hear them. Taking a deep breath, Jennifer smoothed down the borrowed clothes and opened the bathroom door. The hallway beyond was a study in masculine luxury. Dark, woods, cream walls, abstract art in muted colors. It screamed wealth and taste, but felt strangely unlived in, like a museum after hours. Somewhere in this massive house, Charles Hayes was waiting with coffee and explanations. Jennifer stepped into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She had never felt more vulnerable or more determined to uncover the truth about what really happened last night. The scent of coffee led her forward, but each step felt like moving deeper into a beautiful trap. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a warning bell was ringing, because despite Charles's reassurances, one detail kept nagging at her. Why were her clothes wet? The kitchen was a monument to industrial design, all gleaming stainless steel and pristine white marble, untouched by the usual signs of daily life. No magnets on the refrigerator, no mail scattered on countertops, no dishes drying beside the sink. It was perfect, sterile, lonely. Charles stood at a professional-grade coffee machine, his back to her as she entered. The morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows caught the silver at his temples, and for a moment Jennifer saw him not as her boss, but as a man, one carrying invisible weights on his shoulders. "Black, 2 sugars," he said without turning, and she startled at how he remembered her coffee preference. After 3 years of bringing him coffee, she'd never considered that he paid attention to how she took hers. "Thank you." Jennifer's voice sounded strange in the cavernous space. She perched on one of the high stools at the kitchen island, hyper-aware of her bare feet and borrowed clothes. Charles turned, sliding a steaming mug across the marble surface. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes, there was something there she'd never seen before. Concern, guilt, fear. "Your purse and phone are in my study," he said, leaning against the counter opposite her. "The battery died sometime last night." Jennifer wrapped her hands around the warm mug, anchoring herself. What really happened, Charles? The use of his first name hung between them, a small rebellion against their usual professional boundaries. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What's the last thing you remember clearly?" The bar at the Grand Madison, celebrating the Wilson contract. She closed her eyes, trying to grasp the slippery fragments of memory. You were there, and then there were voices, someone laughing, but it's all wrong somehow. A soft chime interrupted the tension. Charles pulled out his phone, frowning at the screen. It's Diane from the office. She's been texting all morning about the Wilson paperwork. On a Saturday? Jennifer reached for her professional instincts like a security blanket. I can help with... No. The sharpness in his voice made her flinch. He softened his tone. The paperwork can wait. We need to discuss last night. Jennifer took a sip of coffee, perfect despite her pounding headache. Then discuss it. Why were my clothes wet? Why can't I remember anything? Why am I in your house instead of a hospital if something was wrong? Charles set his phone down with deliberate care. I found you outside the hotel around midnight. You were disoriented, more than simple intoxication would explain. A chill ran down Jennifer's spine despite the warm sweater. What do you mean? Your drink was tampered with. He said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the counter. I noticed someone paying particular attention to you at the bar. When you started showing signs of being drugged, I intervened. The room seemed to tilt. Drugged? But who would... I have my suspicions. Charles's voice had gone cold. The question is whether it was personal or professional. Professional? Jennifer's laugh held an edge of hysteria. I'm an executive assistant who would... An executive assistant with full access to sensitive corporate information, including the Wilson merger details. He paused, watching her process this. Information that certain parties would pay handsomely to obtain. Jennifer's mind raced. The Wilson contract wasn't just any deal, it was potentially industry-changing, the kind of merger that could reshape markets or destroy companies. The water, she said suddenly. You still haven't explained why I was wet. Something flickered across Charles's face. When I found you, you were near the hotel fountain. I believe you were being led there. If I hadn't arrived when I did... The implication hung heavy in the air. Jennifer felt sick, and it had nothing to do with her hangover. A sharp knock at the kitchen door made them both jump. A woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun stepped in, carrying a tablet. Mr. Hayes, I apologize. Out for interrupting, but there's a situation requiring your immediate attention. Her eyes flicked to Jennifer, then away. It's about last night's incident. Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. Charles straightened, businessman mask sliding back into place. Jennifer, my housekeeper, will show you to the study to retrieve your things. We'll continue this conversation soon. But Jennifer started to protest. Soon, he repeated firmly. Mrs. Crawford, please ensure Miss Carter has everything she needs and call my driver to take her home. He strode out of the kitchen, leaving Jennifer with more questions than answers. Mrs. Crawford watched him go, her expression unreadable. This way, Miss Carter. The housekeeper's tone was professionally polite, but there was something else there. A pity? Warning? Jennifer stood on shaky legs, following Mrs. Crawford through the sterile perfection of Charles's house. But her mind was racing. Someone had drugged her. Someone had tried to... What? Kidnap her? Extract information? And Charles Hayes, her always professional, always distant boss, had somehow known enough to intervene. As they walked, Jennifer caught a glimpse of a security monitor in an alcove. On the screen, she saw Charles in what appeared to be his study, engaged in an intense conversation with someone she couldn't see. His expression was thunderous, more angry than she'd ever seen him. What had she stumbled into? And more importantly, was Charles trying to protect her or control the fallout of whatever game he was playing? Mrs. Crawford cleared her throat pointedly, and Jennifer realized she'd stopped walking. The housekeeper's face gave nothing away, but her next word sent a chill down Jennifer's spine. "Best not to linger, Miss Carter. Some questions are safer, left unasked." The drive home in Charles's sleek town car felt like an escape and a punishment rolled into one. Jennifer sat in the back seat, her dead phone and ruined dress sealed in a discreet black shopping bag, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. The driver, a broad-shouldered man who'd introduced himself only as Rogers, hadn't spoken a word since they'd left Charles's house. Her apartment building in Brooklyn Heights felt smaller than usual as they pulled up, its pre-war charm diminished by the contrast with Charles's mansion. Rogers stepped out to open her door, and for a moment his stance reminded her of a security guard rather than a chauffeur. "Miss Carter," he said, finally breaking his silence. "Mr. Hayes asked me to give you this." He handed her a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. "If you notice anything unusual, day or night." Jennifer stared at the card. No name, just 10 digits in Charles's precise handwriting. "Unusual, like being drugged at a corporate event?" Rogers's face remained impassive. "Unusual, like being followed or feeling watched?" He touched the brim of his cap and returned to the car, leaving Jennifer standing on the sidewalk with more questions burning in her throat. Inside her apartment, the familiar space felt suddenly foreign. Had someone been here while she was gone? She shook her head at her own paranoia, but still found herself checking the locks twice, then examining her windows for signs of tampering. Her laptop sat innocently on the kitchen counter where she'd left it yesterday morning. Jennifer plugged in her phone, waiting impatiently for it to power up. As the screen came to life, notifications flooded in. 3 missed calls from Rebecca in marketing. A voicemail from her mother. 7 text messages from unknown numbers. Her hands shook as she opened the texts. "Hope you made it home safe." 12:47 a.m. "Careful who you trust." 2:13 a.m. "Check your email." 3:30 a.m. "The Wilson contract isn't what you think." 4:15 a.m. "Hayes isn't being honest." 4:16 a.m. "Watch your back." 4:17 a.m. "Delete these messages." 4:18 a.m. Jennifer sat heavily on her couch, the phone nearly slipping from her trembling fingers. The messages could be random pranks, but combined with Charles's warnings about corporate espionage, her laptop chimed with an incoming email. The sender was listed simply as "Friend." "The truth about last night is in the fountain, but you're not the first." Attached was a newspaper article from 3 years ago. "Local woman found dead in hotel fountain, apparent accident." A knock at her door made her jump, slamming the laptop closed. Through the peephole, she saw Rebecca from marketing, looking concerned. "Jennifer? I know you're home. I saw the car drop you off." Rebecca's voice was muffled through the door. "I've been worried sick. No one knew where you went after the gala." Jennifer hesitated, Charles's warnings echoing in her mind. Rebecca had been at the bar last night, hadn't she? She'd been the one to tell Jennifer that Charles was looking for her. "I'm fine," Jennifer called back, not opening the door. "Just feeling under the weather. I'll call you later." "Are you sure? I brought coffee and bagels. We could talk about what happened with Charles." Something in Rebecca's tone set off warning bells. How did she know about Charles? Jennifer had left with him after most people had gone home. "Really not feeling well," Jennifer insisted. "Another time." She waited until Rebecca's footsteps faded away before racing to her bedroom. Her hands shook as she pulled up the browser on her laptop, searching for information about the woman in the fountain. The victim's name was Lauren Dixon, age 28, executive assistant at a rival firm. The article mentioned she'd been at a corporate event the night she died. Jennifer's phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. "Smart girl, not opening the door, but you can't hide forever." Heart pounding, she moved to her window, peering through the blinds. A black SUV was parked across the street, its windows tinted. As she watched, Rebecca walked past it, phone in hand, and the passenger window rolled down briefly. Jennifer's own phone lit up with a call from Charles. She stared at his name on the screen, finger hovering over the answer button. 3 years of working together, and she'd thought she knew him, thought she could read him. Now, the phone kept ringing as she opened her laptop again, typing with shaking fingers. Lauren Dixon death, Grand Madison Hotel fountain. The search returned more articles, and as Jennifer read, her blood ran cold. Lauren hadn't been the only one. There were others, all young women, all connected to major corporate deals, all found near fountains, all ruled accidents or suicides. Her phone stopped ringing, then immediately lit up with a text from Charles. "Whatever you're discovering, stop. It's not safe. Let me explain in person." Jennifer looked out her window again. The SUV was still there, but now a familiar town car had parked behind it. Rogers stood beside it, seemingly casual but alert. Her phone chimed one final time. Unknown number. The question isn't who drugged you, it's who saved you and why. Jennifer sank to the floor, back against the wall. The Wilson contract files were still on her laptop, thousands of pages of details she'd helped prepare. What had she missed? What hadn't she been meant to see? And Charles, was he protecting her? Or protecting himself? She looked at the business card Rogers had given her, then at her phone with its threatening messages. Outside, 2 cars waited, one threatening, one supposedly safe. But which was which? The answer she was beginning to suspect might cost her life. The Hayes Enterprises building looked different on a Saturday afternoon. Devoid of its usual bustle, the towering glass structure felt more like a mausoleum than an office. Jennifer's security badge still worked, a fact that both relieved and unsettled her. If Charles really suspected her involvement in corporate espionage, wouldn't he have revoked her access? The elevator ride to the executive floor was endless. Jennifer kept her face turned away from the security cameras, though she knew it was pointless. Her phone sat heavy in her pocket, Charles's 3 unanswered calls weighing on her conscience. But she couldn't talk to him, not until she knew more. Her desk outside Charles's office was exactly as she'd left it Friday morning. Neat stacks of papers, color-coded folders, her world's okayest assistant mug that had been a joke gift from the IT department. Had it really only been 36 hours? It felt like years. Jennifer booted up her computer, hands steady despite her racing heart. While the system loaded, she pulled out her phone and reread the mysterious texts. One in particular stood out. The Wilson contract isn't what you think. She'd helped prepare those files herself. Thousands of pages of financial projections, merger details, and personnel transitions. What had she missed? The computer prompted for her password, and Jennifer hesitated. If she logged in now, there would be a record. Instead, she turned to the filing cabinet behind her desk. The physical copies of the Wilson contract filled an entire drawer, the official version at least, but there was another copy. 2 months ago, Charles had asked her to make a duplicate set of everything related to Wilson. For the board, he'd said, but then he'd stored them in his private safe, not the boardroom. Jennifer glanced at the closed door to Charles's office. The safe was behind his Rothko, protected by a biometric lock. She had no chance of opening it, but maybe she didn't need to. She was an executive assistant. Her job was knowing everything about how her boss worked, including his habits, like how he always handled sensitive documents at his desk, not wanting them far from the safe, like how he used his custom leather notebook to jot down thoughts during meetings, like how that notebook was still sitting on his desk where he'd left it Friday morning before everything went wrong. Jennifer tried the office door, locked, but that wasn't a surprise. What might surprise Charles was knowing that she'd seen Him enter his door code countless times, memorizing it unconsciously the way assistants absorb all sorts of details about their bosses. The keypad accepted the code with a soft beep. Jennifer slipped inside, closing the door behind her. Charles's office was immaculate as always. Everything in its place, not a paper out of position. Except the leather notebook lay open on his desk, a pen marking his place. Jennifer approached slowly, as if the notebook might bite. This was crossing a line. Reading his private notes wasn't just unprofessional, it might be career suicide. If you're still alive to have a career, her dark voice whispered in her mind. The notebook's pages contained Charles's precise handwriting, notes from the Wilson meetings. Most of it was familiar, points she'd included in the official documents, but in the margins there were other notes, numbers that didn't match the official projections, names she didn't recognize, and there, in Friday's entry, LD connection confirmed, JC must not find out. LD Lauren Dixon, the woman found in the fountain. A sound in the hallway made Jennifer freeze. Footsteps coming closer. She snapped a photo of the page with trembling fingers, then returned the notebook exactly as she'd found it. The footsteps passed by without stopping. Her heart pounding, Jennifer turned to leave and noticed something odd about Charles's laptop dock. The USB port contained a tiny drive, barely visible unless you were looking for it. The same kind of drive she'd seen him use for encrypted files too sensitive for the company servers. Without letting herself think too hard about what she was doing, Jennifer pulled the drive free and slipped it into her pocket. She could return it before Monday. Charles never worked weekends unless there was a crisis. The hallway was still, empty when she emerged. Jennifer locked the office door and returned to her desk, trying to look natural in case the security cameras were being monitored. She began gathering papers into her bag, enough to justify a weekend visit to the office, but not enough to look suspicious. Her phone buzzed. "Found what you were looking for?" Jennifer's blood ran cold. The number was unknown, but this time there was a photo attached. A security camera image of her at her desk, time-stamped 30 seconds ago. Another text followed. "The drive in your pocket belongs to us. Bring it to the fountain at midnight. Come alone." Then a third. "Or would you prefer to end up like Lauren?" Jennifer's hand shook as she shoved the rest of the papers into her bag. She had to get out of here, had to think. The elevator dinged, and she froze. The doors opened to reveal a face she hadn't expected. Mrs. Crawford, Charles's housekeeper, her severe bun as immaculate as ever. "Ms. Carter," Mrs. Crawford's voice was clipped. "I've been looking for you." "I was just leaving," Jennifer managed, clutching her bag. "No." Mrs. Crawford stepped out of the elevator, letting the doors close behind her. "You're coming with me. There are things you need to know about Charles Hayes and about Lauren Dixon." Through the office windows, Jennifer could see the fountain in the plaza below. Water sparkled in the afternoon sun, beautiful and threatening. "Why should I trust you?" Jennifer asked. Mrs. Crawford's face softened slightly. "Because I was Lauren's aunt, and because Charles isn't the only one who's been watching you." In Jennifer's pocket, the USB drive felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. Whatever was on it, multiple people were willing to kill for it. The question was, which side was Mrs. Crawford really on? The cafe was small and unremarkable, the kind of place that survived on regular customers and cash transactions. Mrs. Crawford had insisted on it, 3 blocks from the Hayes building and far enough from any security cameras. She sat across from Jennifer, her rigid posture unchanged, but something different flickered in her eyes, a vulnerability Jennifer hadn't seen before. "Lauren was my sister's only child," Mrs. Crawford began, her fingers wrapped around an untouched cup of tea. "She was brilliant, ambitious, and too curious for her own good. Jennifer's own coffee cooled between her hands. The USB drive pressed against her thigh through her pocket, a constant reminder of the midnight deadline ticking closer. 3 years ago, Mrs. Crawford continued, Lauren was exactly where you are now, an executive assistant who discovered something she wasn't supposed to know. She paused, studying Jennifer's face. About Charles Hayes, and about what really happens to companies after Hayes Enterprises acquires them. The Wilson contract, Jennifer said softly. The numbers in Charles's notebook didn't match the official projections, because the official projections are lies. Mrs. Crawford's voice turned harsh. Hayes Enterprises doesn't acquire companies to save them. They strip them for assets, fire the workers, and sell off the pieces. But first, they need inside information, the kind only executive assistants have access to. Jennifer's mind raced. The Wilson contract had seemed too good to be true. Hayes Enterprises swooping in to save a struggling company, promising to retain all employees and maintain existing operations. Lauren found proof, Mrs. Crawford continued. Hidden accounts, shell companies, a pattern going back decades. She confronted Charles, thinking she could stop it. Her voice cracked slightly. The next day, she was found in the fountain. But Charles saved me, Jennifer protested, from whoever drugged me at the gala. Mrs. Crawford's laugh was bitter. Did he? Or did he stage the entire thing to gain your trust, to make you feel indebted to him? Jennifer's phone buzzed. A text from Charles. Where are you? We need to talk. It's urgent. He's been watching me, Jennifer said. Or someone has. They want the drive I took from his office. Of course they do. Mrs. Crawford reached into her severe black handbag and withdrew a small leather portfolio. Because it contains the same information Lauren found 3 years ago. I've been working as Charles's housekeeper since then, waiting for a chance to prove what really happened to her. She opened the portfolio, revealing a stack of papers. Financial records, emails, photographs. Lauren made copies, gave them to me the day before she died, but it wasn't enough to prove anything. That drive you have? It's the missing piece. Jennifer's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. 6 hours until midnight. The fountain is waiting. Why are you telling me this? Jennifer asked. Why now? Because you're different. Mrs. Crawford leaned forward. Lauren tried to fight them alone, but you have skills she didn't, connections she didn't, and most importantly, you have something they want. A shadow fell across their table. Jennifer looked up to see Rogers, Charles's driver, standing there. His usual stoic expression was gone, replaced by urgent concern. Miss Carter, Mrs. Crawford. He glanced around the cafe. We need to move, now. How did you... Jennifer began. There's no time. Rogers cut her off. 2 SUVs just pulled up outside, the same ones that have been watching your apartment. Mrs. Crawford was already standing, gathering her materials with practiced efficiency. The back door, through the kitchen. My car's in the alley. Jennifer's phone lit up with another text from Charles. Whatever Catherine Crawford is telling you, she's not who you think. Don't trust her. How does he know I'm with you? Jennifer asked Mrs. Crawford. Because Charles Hayes knows everything. Mrs. Crawford's smile was grim. That's how he's stayed alive this long. They hurried through the kitchen, past startled staff, and out into a narrow alley. Mrs. Crawford's car was indeed there, a nondescript Honda that would blend into any traffic. Get in, Mrs. Crawford ordered. Both of you. Rogers hesitated. My loyalty is to Mr. Hayes. Your loyalty was to Lauren first, Mrs. Crawford snapped. Or have you forgotten? Something passed between them, an old understanding, or perhaps an old wound. Rogers nodded once and slid into the back seat. As Mrs. Crawford pulled out of the alley, Jennifer's phone buzzed one final time. The message made her blood run cold. Did Catherine tell you why she really took the housekeeper job? Ask her about the money Lauren embezzled before she died. Ask her about the real reason for the midnight meeting. Jennifer looked at Mrs. Crawford's stern profile, then at Rogers in the rearview mirror. The USB drive felt heavier than ever in her pocket. Everyone wanted the drive. Everyone had secrets. And Jennifer was running out of time to figure out which version of the truth would keep her alive. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Mrs. Crawford answered. "We have 6 hours until midnight, just enough time to show you what was really on that drive Lauren died for." In the rearview mirror, Jennifer saw 2 black SUVs pull out of the cafe parking lot. They turned in opposite directions, one following Mrs. Crawford's car, the other heading toward the fountain. The game wasn't just about corporate takeovers anymore. It was about murder, betrayal, and a conspiracy that went deeper than Jennifer had imagined, and she was trapped in the middle of it all, with no way to know who was telling the truth. Mrs. Crawford's safe place turned out to be a converted warehouse in Red Hook, the kind of building that had probably been destined for luxury condos before some developer ran out of money. The space inside was sparse but functional. A few computers, filing cabinets, and a wall covered in photographs and documents connected by red string, like something out of a detective movie. "Lauren's research," Mrs. Crawford explained, moving to one of the computers. "Everything she discovered about Hayes Enterprises, everything that got her killed." Jennifer pulled the USB drive from her pocket, studying it in the harsh fluorescent light. Such a small thing to die for. Rogers stood by the windows, keeping watch, his broad shoulders tense. 4 hours until midnight, he reminded them. Mrs. Crawford held out her hand for the drive. Jennifer hesitated, Charles's text about Lauren's embezzlement echoing in her mind. "Before I hand this over," Jennifer said carefully, "tell me about the money Lauren supposedly stole." The older woman's face tightened. "Who told you about that? Does it matter?" "It matters because it's a lie." Mrs. Crawford's voice was sharp. "A lie Charles Hayes created to discredit Lauren after her death, to make it look like she killed herself out of guilt. Then you won't mind if I check the drive myself first." Mrs. Crawford's eyes narrowed, but she gestured to a laptop. "Be my guest." Jennifer inserted the drive, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she navigated through encrypted folders. 3 years as Charles's assistant had taught her his organizational patterns, the way he named and structured files. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for. "These are transfer records," she said, scanning the documents. "Money moving between Hayes Enterprises and shell companies." "Keep going," Mrs. Crawford urged. The next folder contained emails, hundreds of them dating back years. Correspondence about company acquisitions, asset stripping operations disguised as restructuring, planned layoffs hidden behind promises of job security. "The Wilson contract," Jennifer murmured, opening a recent file. "Everything in the official proposal is a lie. They're planning to break up the company, sell it off in pieces. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Just like they did at Carlton Industries," Rogers spoke up from his post, "and Meridian Tech and a dozen others." Jennifer turned to him. "You knew about this?" "I was Lauren's driver too." His face was grim. "I saw what the job did to her. Watched her try to fight it just like you're doing now. But you still work for Charles. Sometimes the best way to fight something is from the inside." Jennifer returned to the files, but something wasn't adding up. "These emails, some of them are from Lauren's account after she died." Mrs. Crawford went very still. "What?" Jennifer pulled up an email chain dated 6 months after Lauren's death. The messages discussed moving funds between accounts, authorizing transactions, all sent from Lauren's corporate email address. "Someone's been using her account," Jennifer said. "Still is. The last email was sent yesterday." A heavy silence fell over the warehouse. Jennifer's mind raced, pieces clicking into place. The mysterious texts, the warnings, the way Mrs. Crawford had known exactly where to find her. "Catherine," she said slowly, using the woman's first name for the first time. "How did you know what was on this drive, if you'd never seen it before?" The older woman's face had gone blank. "Jennifer, and why did you take the housekeeper job right after Lauren died? 3 years is a long time to wait for proof you already." Doom. Rogers had moved away from the window, his stance shifting subtly. "The money that disappeared," Jennifer continued, pulling up another file. "It wasn't Lauren who took it. It was you, using her accounts, her passwords. You're still doing it now." "You don't understand," Mrs. Crawford said, her cultured voice cracking. "Hayes Enterprises destroyed my family's company 20 years ago. Lauren found out the truth, tried to help me get justice, but she wasn't careful enough. So you let her die?" Jennifer's voice shook with anger. "Used her death as cover to continue stealing. I used the money to fund this investigation." Mrs. Crawford gestured at the wall of evidence. "To build a case strong enough to bring them down. Lauren would have understood." "Would she?" Rogers asked quietly. His gun was drawn now, pointed at Mrs. Crawford. "Because that's not how I remember her." Jennifer's phone buzzed. "Charles, got your location. Don't react. Keep her talking." "The midnight meeting," Jennifer said. "That wasn't about the drive at all, was it? It was about the money. You've been using Lauren's identity to embezzle funds, and someone found out." Mrs. Crawford's mask of grief cracked, revealing something harder beneath. "Hayes Enterprises has destroyed countless lives. The money is nothing compared to—" The warehouse windows exploded inward. Black-clad figures rappelled down from above, rifles raised. Jennifer dove behind a desk as chaos erupted. "FBI!" a voice boomed. "Everyone on the ground!" Through the chaos, Jennifer saw Mrs. Crawford reaching for something in her bag. Rogers tackled the older woman as shots rang out. A canister rolled across the floor, spewing smoke. "Jennifer!" Charles's voice cut through the confusion. He was there somehow, pulling her toward the exit. "We need to move!" Her last glimpse of the warehouse was of Mrs. Crawford being handcuffed, her severe bun coming undone, tears cutting through her perfect mask. The wall of evidence burned behind her, years of obsession going up in flames. "She was using us," Jennifer gasped as Charles led her to safety. "All of us, Lauren, me, even you." "Yes," Charles said grimly, "but she wasn't working alone, and now we're all in danger." In her pocket, Jennifer's phone buzzed one final time. Unknown number. "Midnight's been moved up. Hope you're ready to learn what really happened to Lauren Dixon." The night wasn't over yet, and Jennifer had a feeling. The worst revelations were still to come. Charles's penthouse office suite occupied the top floor of an unmarked building in Lower Manhattan, far from the Hayes Enterprises headquarters. As the elevator doors opened, Jennifer realized why she'd never been here before. This wasn't a place for executive assistants. This was where real power lived. The space was all dark wood and gleaming steel, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. In the distance, emergency vehicles' lights still flickered around the warehouse in Red Hook. Jennifer's hands hadn't stopped shaking since the raid. "Sit," Charles said, moving to a hidden bar. "You look like you could use a drink. What I need are answers." Jennifer remained standing. The real ones this time. Charles poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, his movements precise despite the chaos they'd just escaped. He'd shed his usual corporate mask, and something darker, more dangerous had emerged beneath it. "Lauren Dixon wasn't the first," he said, holding out a glass, "but I had hoped you would be the last." Jennifer didn't take the drink. "The last what?" "The last person I had to save from the board." He moved to his desk, pressing a hidden button. A panel in the wall slid open, revealing dozens of screens displaying security feeds, financial data, email chains. At the center, was a photograph of an elderly man Jennifer recognized, William Hayes, Charles's father and the company's founder. Hayes Enterprises has a tradition, Charles continued, one my father started 40 years ago. When we acquire a company, certain sacrifices are required, usually involving people who know too much. The Fountain victims, Jennifer said, they were all murdered. Not all of them. Charles's face was grim. Some were warnings, some were accidents, and some, like Lauren, were complicated. He touched a screen, bringing up a video feed. Jennifer recognized the Grand Madison Hotel's security footage from 3 years ago. Lauren Dixon stood at the bar, talking to a man whose face was hidden. Lauren discovered what you did, that our acquisitions were covers for asset stripping, operations, but she found something else too. Charles paused. Evidence that the board was using these takeovers to hide something worse. Human trafficking, money laundering, things that would destroy not just the company, but dozens of lives. Jennifer's mind raced. The Wilson contract is legitimate. My attempt to finally do an honest deal. His laugh was bitter. The board didn't approve. That's why they targeted you at the gala. They needed to know how much you'd discovered. But you stopped them. I tried to stop them with Lauren, too. Charles pulled up another video. I warned her, offered protection, but she trusted the wrong person. The footage showed Lauren leaving the hotel, stumbling slightly. A figure followed her, a woman in a severe black dress, her grey hair in a perfect bun. Mrs. Crawford, Jennifer breathed. She was working for the board even then. Catherine Crawford was my father's most trusted operative. When companies needed to disappear, she made it happen. Lauren was her niece, yes, but family meant nothing compared to loyalty to the board. Jennifer sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The embezzlement, the midnight threats, it was all a distraction. Catherine went rogue after Lauren's death, started stealing from the company, building her own evidence cache. The board let her play her game, knowing it would eventually lead us to something bigger. Charles's voice hardened. To you. Jennifer's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Ask him about the fountain. Ask him what really happened that night. Charles saw her expression change. Let me guess. Another cryptic warning. How did you know I'd take the USB drive? Jennifer asked instead. How did you know I'd go to the office today? Because I know you, Jennifer, better than you think. He moved to the windows, staring out at the city, just like I knew Lauren would try to save everyone. It's what got her killed. You're lying. Jennifer stood, anger replacing fear. The texts, the warnings, they're not from the board. They're from someone who knows what really happened that night. Charles turned, his expression unreadable. Jennifer, the video footage from the gala. Show it to me. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he touched another screen. Security footage from 2 nights ago appeared. Jennifer at the bar, Charles watching her. But something was wrong with the timestamp. The footage is edited, Jennifer said. Just like Lauren's emails that kept sending after she died. You're not protecting me from the board. You're covering up what really happened. Charles's face changed, the mask cracking completely. You don't understand. What's at stake? Then explain it to me, Jennifer's voice rose. Explain why my clothes were wet when I woke up. Explain why you've been watching me for 3 years. Explain why Lauren's last text message was to you. She pulled up her phone, showing him the screenshot she'd discovered in the USB drives. Hidden folder. A message sent from Lauren's phone moments before her death. I trusted you, Charles. God help Jennifer if she makes the same mistake. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Outside, a helicopter passed close to the building, its searchlight briefly illuminating Charles's face. In that moment, Jennifer Saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Her phone buzzed one final time. The message was simple. Check the fountain drain. The truth doesn't stay buried forever. I know what happened to Lauren, Jennifer said quietly, and I know why you brought me to this office instead of taking me to the FBI. Charles's hand moved toward his desk drawer. Jennifer, please. You never planned to let me leave, did you? The helicopter was back, closer now, but it wasn't searching for escaped criminals from the warehouse raid. It was coming for them. In the distance, a fountain sparkled in the night, waiting to reveal its final secrets. The helicopter's searchlight swept through the penthouse windows again, casting Charles's face in harsh relief. Jennifer watched his hand hover near the desk drawer, calculating her odds. The elevator was too far, the stairs would take too long, and she was 60 stories above Manhattan. You're right, Charles said quietly, about most of it, but not everything. He opened the drawer slowly, withdrawing not a weapon but a phone. Older, battered, its screen cracked. Jennifer recognized it instantly. Lauren's phone, she breathed. The police report said it was never found. Because I took it that... Light. Charles set the phone on his desk. To protect her, to protect everyone. But I was too late. The helicopter was circling closer. Through the windows, Jennifer could make out the letters on its side. FBI. That night at the fountain, Charles continued, Lauren called me. Said she'd found proof of what the board was really doing. Said she finally understood why her aunt had pushed her to take the job at Hayes Enterprises. Jennifer's own phone buzzed again. 2 minutes until the truth comes out. Hope you're ready. Mrs. Crawford planted her there, Jennifer said. To spy on you? To spy on my father. Charles's laugh was hollow. Lauren was supposed to be Catherine's inside source, feeding information about William Hayes's private dealings. Instead, she discovered something worse, proof that Catherine was running her own operation inside Hayes Enterprises, using the company's acquisitions to build a network of shell corporations, laundering money for some very dangerous people. The pieces started falling into place. That's why Mrs. Crawford took the housekeeper job after Lauren died, to cover her tracks and to watch me. Charles moved to the windows, staring at the approaching helicopter. She knew I had Lauren's phone, knew what was on it. She spent 3 years trying to get it back. What's on it? A video, Lauren's last message, recorded at the fountain. Proof that Catherine Crawford ordered her death when she refused to cooperate. He turned back to Jennifer. The same thing. She tried to do to you at the gala. Jennifer's head spun. The drink, it wasn't the board. Catherine saw how close you were getting to the truth about the Wilson contract, about all of it. She couldn't risk you finding what Lauren had hidden. But you stopped her. I've been trying to stop her for 3 years. Charles's voice was heavy with exhaustion, gathering evidence, tracking her operations, but she was always one step ahead. Until you. The helicopter was almost at the building now. Jennifer could see figures preparing to rappel down. The texts, she said, suddenly. They weren't from the board or Mrs. Crawford. They were from you. Charles nodded. I needed you to find the USB drive, to discover the truth about Catherine yourself. It was the only way to protect you. By making me a target? By making you too valuable to kill. He held out Lauren's phone. Catherine's being arrested right now, but she's not working alone. The evidence on this phone, it implicates people far more powerful than the Hayes Enterprises board. The first FBI agents crashed through the windows before Jennifer could respond. Glass shattered around them as armed figures swarmed the office. Charles Hayes, a voice boomed. Step away from Miss Carter and put your hands where we can see them. But Jennifer was staring at her phone, at one final message from an unknown number. The fountain holds 2 secrets. Find the other one. Wait, She called out as agents moved to handcuff Charles. "The phone! We need to see what's on it." An agent Jennifer hadn't noticed stepped forward, removing his tactical helmet. "That's why we're here, Ms. Carter." It was Rogers. "FBI counterintelligence," he explained. "We've been building a case against Catherine Crawford and her network for years. Charles has been working with us since Lauren's death." Jennifer's mind raced back to the warehouse, to Roger's careful positioning, his perfectly timed response. "You let Mrs. Crawford think you were on her side, just like Charles let the board think he was his father's son." Rogers took Lauren's phone carefully. This should be enough to bring down the entire operation. But Jennifer was already moving toward the elevator. "We need to get to the fountain." "Jennifer," Charles called after her, "there's something else you need to know about Lauren, about what else she found that night." She turned back. In the harsh glare of the helicopter's lights, surrounded by FBI agents, Charles Hayes finally looked human. "The other secret in the fountain," he said. "It's about your father." Jennifer's world tilted. "My father died when I was a child." "No," Charles said softly. "That's what William Hayes wanted you to believe. Lauren found the truth, and it got her killed. Your father was William's business partner, and what happened to him? It's where all of this really began." The helicopter's rotors drowned out everything else, but Jennifer could still read Charles's final words. "He's alive, and he's been watching you all along." The fountain looked different at night. Water cascaded down, its dark tears, the corporate plaza's lighting casting strange shadows across its surface. Jennifer stood at its edge, Charles and Rogers flanking her, while FBI agents secured the perimeter. The rest of the city felt distant, as if the fountain had created its own pocket of reality. "Your father was Daniel Carter," Charles said, his voice barely audible above the running water. "He and my father built Hayes Enterprises together until the night he supposedly died in a car accident 20 years ago." Jennifer stared at her distorted reflection in the dark water. "Why would William Hayes fake my father's death?" "Because Daniel discovered what the company was really being used for." Charles pulled up an old photograph on his phone, two men standing in front of a construction site. William Hayes, younger but still imposing, and beside him a man with Jennifer's eyes. "Money laundering was just the beginning. Your father found evidence of something worse. Human trafficking," Rogers added grimly. "Using corporate acquisitions as cover to move people across borders. William Hayes had connections with criminal organizations worldwide." Jennifer's hands clenched into fists. "And my father tried to stop it?" "He tried to expose it," Charles said. "But William Hayes had too much power, too many corrupt officials in his pocket. So he gave Daniel a choice: disappear or watch his family die." The fountain's waters seemed to whisper with secrets. Jennifer thought of her childhood after her father's death, the mysterious trust fund that paid for her education, the way doors had always seemed to open for her career. "The job at Hayes Enterprises," she said slowly. "That wasn't a coincidence. Your father has been watching over you," Charles confirmed, "working from the shadows, trying to gather enough evidence to finally bring down William Hayes's empire. Lauren discovered his existence while investigating the company's hidden accounts." "And that's what got her killed?" Jennifer asked. "Not exactly." Rogers moved to the fountain's edge, examining its rim. "Lauren made contact with your father. They were working together, gathering evidence, but Catherine Crawford found out." Jennifer's phone buzzed one final time. "The truth is in the foundation." "The drain," she said suddenly. The messages kept mentioning the fountain drain. Rogers nodded to his team. Within minutes, they had shut off the fountain's pump and were draining the lowest basin. As the water level dropped, Jennifer saw it. A small waterproof case wedged into a maintenance grate. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note in unfamiliar handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm dead. But Daniel Carter isn't everything. You need to know is here. Find him. Lauren, play it, Jennifer demanded. Rogers connected the drive to a secure tablet. Lauren's face filled the screen. Younger, more alive than in the photographs Jennifer had seen. She was recording in what looked like a parking garage. I don't have much time, Lauren said, glancing over her shoulder. Catherine knows I've been meeting with Daniel Carter. She's working with someone inside the FBI, feeding them information about his location. If you're watching this, Jennifer, your father is in danger. The account numbers in this drive, they're not just proof of Hayes Enterprises crimes. They're a message. Your father encrypted his location in the transaction records. Catherine hasn't figured it out yet, but she will. You need to... The video cut off in a burst of static. That was the night she died, Charles said quietly. Minutes later, Catherine's men caught up with her at this fountain. Jennifer stared at the frozen image of Lauren's face. She was trying to help me find my father. And now Catherine's people know you have the information they've been looking for. Rogers checked his phone. We've got a team at the warehouse processing her files, but she managed to send a message before we arrested her. To who? Unknown number, he read. Text says, she found it. Activate contingency plan. The plaza's lights went out suddenly, plunging them into darkness. In the distance, car alarms began blaring. Power grid's been hacked, an agent reported. It's spreading across the district. Jennifer's phone lit up with a new message. But this time, she recognized the number. She'd been seeing it in the Hayes Enterprises financial records for years, never realizing its significance. Hello, sweetheart. Been waiting 20 years to say that. Time to come home. Attached was a photo of a lighthouse on a rocky coast, its beam cutting through darkness. In the foreground, barely visible, stood a man with Jennifer's eyes. That's the Hayes family compound in Maine, Charles said, looking over her shoulder. Where this all started. Where what started? The first acquisition, the first cover-up. His face was grim. Where your father faked his death. In the darkness, the fountain's empty basin looked like a waiting grave. Jennifer thought of Lauren, of all the others who had died trying to expose the truth, of her father waiting 20 years to reveal himself. They'll be expecting us, Rogers warned. Jennifer looked at the lighthouse photo again. Good. Because now she knew this wasn't just about corporate corruption or criminal enterprises. This was about family, about justice, about finishing what Lauren Dixon and Daniel Carter had started. My father's been hiding long enough, she said. It's time to end this. Behind them, sirens wailed as darkness spread across Manhattan. Somewhere in Maine, a lighthouse beam swept across dark waters, signaling the beginning of the end. The real battle was about to begin. The helicopter cut through heavy clouds, rain lashing against its windows as the Maine coastline emerged below. Jennifer studied the satellite photos spread across her laptop, trying to memorize every detail of the Hayes compound. Beside her, Charles was making calls, coordinating with FBI teams converging on the area. Power's still out in half of Manhattan, Rogers reported from the pilot's seat. Catherine's people are trying to destroy evidence, but we've got teams securing every Hayes Enterprises server farm on the East Coast. Jennifer barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on a new message from her father. The lighthouse keeps its own secrets. Remember the story I used to tell you about the smugglers' caves? I don't remember any stories, she muttered. I was 5 when you disappeared. Charles looked up from his phone. The caves are real. William used them to move people in and out of the country undetected. The lighthouse was just a cover. And my father's been hiding there all this time? Not exactly. Charles showed her another satellite image. Thermal readings of the compound. There's a network of tunnels under the entire property. Some date back to Prohibition, others are newer. Your father could be anywhere down there. Lightning flickered across the dark sky. illuminating the coastline. The Hayes compound sprawled across a rocky peninsula, a Victorian mansion, various outbuildings, and at its tip, the lighthouse standing like a sentinel. Jennifer's phone chimed with another message from the unknown number. Storm's getting worse. Just like the night you asked about the lighthouse beam, remember? You were afraid of the dark. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Sitting in her father's lap, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across her bedroom wall. The light keeps us safe, he'd said. As long as it's turning, nothing bad can happen. The next night, he was gone. We've got movement at the compound, Rogers announced. Multiple vehicles arriving, heat signatures in the main house, and... Wait. He adjusted something on his instruments. There's some kind of interference coming from the lighthouse. They're expecting us, Charles said grimly. Jennifer studied the thermal images again. Something about the pattern of heat signatures nagged at her. These tunnels, they all lead to the lighthouse? According to the blueprints William filed with the county. Charles paused, but those could easily be fake. Like my father's death certificate. Jennifer's voice was sharp. Like Lauren's accident report, like everything else in this company. Before Charles could respond, Jennifer's phone lit up with a series of rapid messages. Don't trust the blueprints. Don't trust the lights. Don't trust Charles. Remember what Lauren found in the fountain. What did she find? Jennifer demanded, turning to Charles. What else was in that fountain besides her video? Thunder cracked overhead as Charles hesitated. Jennifer, no more lies. She held up her phone. These messages, they're not all from my father, are they? Someone else has been trying to warn me. Lauren had a twin sister, Charles said quietly. Lucy. They were supposed to work together, infiltrate Hayes Enterprises from different angles, but Lucy disappeared the night Lauren died. Jennifer's mind raced. Mrs. Crawford said Lauren was her sister's only child. Another lie? Rogers banked the helicopter away from a lightning strike. Lucy's been working with us, helping build the case against Catherine. She's the one who helped me get inside the organization. Why didn't you tell me? Because Lucy found evidence that someone in the FBI was working with William Hayes, Charles explained. Someone high up enough to bury any investigation. We couldn't risk Catherine finding out she was alive. The helicopter's radio crackled. Multiple boats approaching the peninsula. Armed contacts confirmed. Jennifer looked out at the dark water. Where boats were indeed converging on the compound, the lighthouse beams swept across them, regular as a heartbeat. Her phone chimed one final time. But this message was different. A photo of a young woman who looked exactly like Lauren, holding up a newspaper from yesterday. Time to meet properly, the text read. But first ask Charles about the real reason William Hayes wanted your father gone. Ask him about Project Oracle. What's Project Oracle? Jennifer asked. The look that passed between Charles and Rogers sent a chill down her spine. The reason William Hayes had to die, Charles said softly. Lightning illuminated the compound again. In that brief flash, Jennifer saw figures moving on the lighthouse gallery. One of them raised a hand in greeting. The storm was about to break. And with it, 20 years of secrets were finally coming to light. But as they descended toward the Hayes compound, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that she was still missing something crucial. Something about the fountain, about Lauren's death, about why William Hayes had really targeted her father. The lighthouse beam swept across their helicopter one last time. In its light, Jennifer saw Charles touch something in his pocket. A gesture she'd seen him make 1,000 times at the office, a gesture that suddenly meant something very different. The lighthouse interior was a maze of rusted machinery and shadows. Jennifer climbed the spiral staircase, gun borrowed from Rogers held steady despite her racing heart. Every step brought her closer to answers and to the figure she'd glimpsed on the gallery. Behind her, Charles and Rogers secured each level. But Jennifer barely noticed. Her focus was on the phone messages still coming. Almost there. Watch the shadows. Don't let him touch his pocket. That last one made her pause. She turned to Charles, saw his hand drift to his jacket pocket again. That familiar gesture she'd seen countless times at the office. "Show me," she said quietly. Gun unwavering. "Jennifer, now." Slowly, Charles withdrew something small and metallic. Lauren's locket. The one mentioned in her police report as missing. "You were there that night," Jennifer said. "Not just when she died. You were there at the fountain with her." Thunder shook the lighthouse. Through the windows, lightning illuminated boats surrounding the peninsula, FBI and unknown forces converging. "I was trying to save her," Charles said, "just like I tried to save you at the gala. By drugging my drink yourself." The pieces clicked into place. "A controlled dose to get me out before Catherine could make her move. That's why my clothes were wet. You had to make it look real. To protect you, like you protected Lauren." Before he could answer, Roger's radio crackled. "Project Oracle files found at the Hayes mansion. Sir, you need to see this." A new message lit up Jennifer's phone, a video file. She played it and Lauren's face filled the screen. But this wasn't the desperate final message from the fountain. This was earlier, calmer. "If you're seeing this," Lauren said, "Charles has finally shown you the locket, which means he's ready to admit what really happened that night. What William Hayes forced him to do." Jennifer's hand tightened on the gun. "Play it," she told Charles. He opened the locket. A tiny projector activated, throwing images onto the lighthouse wall. Security footage from the night Lauren died. But not from the fountain, from William Hayes's office. "Project Oracle wasn't just about human trafficking," Charles said quietly. "It was about information, blackmail, control. My father built a database of secrets that could destroy governments. Lauren and Lucy found it. They were going to expose everything. The footage showed William Hayes confronting Lauren, then Charles entering. Words were exchanged. A gun appeared. "He gave me the same choice he gave your father," Charles continued. "Participate or watch my family suffer. But Lauren, she offered me a third option." The gallery door burst open. A woman who looked exactly like Lauren stood framed in the stormlight, gun trained on Charles. "Hello, brother," Lucy Dixon said. Jennifer's world tilted. "Brother." "William Hayes's secret heir," Lucy explained, moving into the room. "Born to his mistress, placed in the Dixon family to spy on us, except it backfired. Charles chose his sisters over his father." "Half-sisters," Charles corrected softly. "The night at the fountain, Lauren needed William to believe she was dead, to believe I was loyal. So we staged it, used Catherine's own plan against her, but something went wrong. Catherine's people were watching," Lucy picked up. "They found the real evidence Lauren had hidden. Found out about your father, Jennifer, about what he'd built into the lighthouse itself." Jennifer looked up at the great lens above them, its beam still sweeping the dark waters. "What did he build?" "A kill switch," a new voice said. Daniel Carter stepped from the shadows. 20 years older, but with the same kind eyes Jennifer remembered. Project Oracle needed a weak point, something that could destroy the whole system if William ever lost control. "I built it into the lighthouse's original programming, a signal hidden in the beam itself. Which is why William had to die," Charles added. "When he figured out what Daniel had done, he tried to change the lighthouse's signal, but he had a heart attack right here, trying to reach the control room. And Catherine's been trying to crack the programming ever since," Lucy finished, "using the company's resources, forcing Charles to play along while she hunted for Daniel." Jennifer's phone lit up one last time. The answer was always in the light. Lauren's final message, she realized. The evidence in the fountain. It wasn't just about the trafficking. It was about this place, this moment. Daniel moved to the control panel, his fingers dancing across ancient dials. Project Oracle ends tonight. The lighthouse signal will broadcast everything. Every secret, every crime, every name in William's database. No more shadows to hide in. Suddenly, Rogers's voice cut through the storm. FBI units breached. Catherine's people are inside. Gunfire erupted below. Lucy moved to cover the stairs while Charles barred the door. How long? Jennifer asked her father. 3 minutes to upload, then one final sweep of the beam. She thought of Lauren, of all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. They'll try to stop the signal. They'll have to get through us first, Lucy said grimly. The lighthouse windows shattered as grappling hooks latched onto the gallery. Dark figures began ascending, ropes through the storm. Jennifer took position beside her father, gun ready. Charles and Lucy flanked them, years of secrets finally giving way to simple truth. The beam swept one last time across the dark water. In its light, Jennifer saw everything clearly at last. Not just the approaching figures, but the pattern that had always been there. The father who'd hidden to protect her, the man who'd chosen his sisters over power, the twins who'd sacrificed everything to expose the truth. And in that clarity, she knew exactly what Lauren had seen in her final moments, not defeat, but hope. Not an ending, but a signal in the dark, waiting for the right moment to shine. The storm raged, the water churned, and the night exploded into violence. But above it all, the lighthouse beam carried its hidden message out into the world, breaking 20 years of shadows with the simple, unstoppable power of light. Some secrets are too big to keep, some truths demand to be seen. And sometimes, Jennifer realized as she faced the darkness beside her newfound family, the greatest power lies not in hiding from the light, but in choosing to share it. The fountain had kept its secrets long enough. Now it was time for the truth to flow free. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.